Welcome and hello. This is a video tutorial on HEC ResSim, and in today's lesson, I'm going to talk about induced surcharge rules. These are release rules that are used in very specific flood situations. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the interface here. I've got my reservoir network. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and then right click on the reservoir, edit reservoir properties. First, I want to show you the physical tab. I've already got a dam and controlled outlets. You're seeing here these elevations and capacities, 5 outlets. So here's the total max capacity. Also, I have a spillway, which is an uncontrolled outlet. And when I click on the dam, we see the cumulative numbers here, controlled, uncontrolled, total, and then here's the plot. If I click on the plot, you see that the flow is added together for the blue line being the total, green is controlled, and then the red is the spillway, the uncontrolled. All right, so I am going somewhere with this. Let's go ahead and check out the operations tab. I've also already created a few zones: flood control, zone A, zone B, zone C, and inactive. Okay, what we're doing in this video is talking about induced surcharge rules. Induced surcharge is a very specific rule that would be utilized in a probable maximum flood situation, sort of a save the dam scenario. The induced surcharge operation in ResSim is a special operation whose primary objective is to protect the dam without making the downstream flooding worse than if the dam were never there. The primary objective here we're talking about is flood control. And by holding back or reducing the peak inflow into the reservoir pool, the downstream peak will be reduced. I'm going to go ahead and create two rules here. The first rule will be a minimum and the second will be a maximum. So these two rules together will serve as a specified value. Let me just get started and then it'll hopefully make a little bit more sense. The first rule I'm going to just name induced surcharge. It's not a great name, but that's good enough for identification purposes. It needs to be reservoir. So the rule type would be induced surcharge. It's the third one down here. And then I'll click OK. I'm going to go ahead and also add my complementary rule, which is going to be a max limit rule. This is going to be a release function rule. I'm going to call it max limit, though. Again, not a great name, but it's descriptive enough for what we're doing here. Also going to control based on the reservoir, and it is a release function rule. All right. So the induced surcharge rule and max limit rule will together create what is ultimately like a specified rule. But max limit's going to be maximum, and it's going to be based on, if I click define, it's going to be based on a model variable, which is the elevation in the reservoir. So I'll click that. And then I'm going to select and click OK. I'm not going to fill this out. We've done release function rules in previous lessons, but we would have a table of values here. I want to focus on the induced surcharge rule. Now, once we make edits to this table, we need to select if it's using induced surcharge function or specify the ESRD curve. There's almost too much to talk about and explain, so I'm just going to stick with this first option where we identify the elevation and then the minimum release. So remember, this first rule is the minimum, and then the second rule is the maximum. Oops. Okay. Also, I should probably mention that these two rules should be applied to every single zone, and they should also be the top two rules. And we can do that by just going right click and saying add rule to all zones. And then for the max limit, right click, add rule to all zones. So we can edit the rule anywhere and it'll update it in all the zones. These two rules work in tandem and they operate at the same time. These rules will only be triggered based on the pool elevation and rapidly rising inflow or rapidly rising pool elevation. Now I'm going to paste in some data for the induced surcharge envelope curve, is what it's called. And then I'm going to select my interpolation type. They look about the same. This curve represents the maximum pool elevation the reservoir is allowed to reach while operating. Down below is the time of recession, and this represents the length of time an incoming flood is expected to recede. So I'll just put a number in there. Over to the right is our plot, and if I double click this plot, in this plot we have two lines. There's the induced surcharge envelope line, and then we have the total capacity of release from the dam. What this tells us is if our elevation was, say, 1480, the induced surcharge would release about 4,500, even though at that particular water surface elevation, we'd have capacity to release about 11,000. This is just my example. These numbers may not be too realistic, though. Down below, we also need to make edits to the falling pool options by clicking this button, edit falling pool options. The time for pool decrease in hours represents the number of consecutive hours the reservoir pool level must be falling before the minimum release determination transitions from the rising pool release to the falling pool release. So we can just put, say, 4 hours. This falling pool transition elevation represents the elevation where if the water surface in the reservoir pool is above this elevation, then the falling pool rules will be applied. And if it's below the elevation, then it won't be applied. And other rules in that zone will be used to determine the release. The release options for the falling pool include ratio of inflow. So if we wanted to release 120% of the inflow over the last 4 hours, we could just put a 1.2 there and then 4 hours. The next option is the average of the inflow and previous release. Then we just specify the number of hours. And then the last two options don't have any parameters. It's either to maintain the peak release or to maintain peak gate openings. So go ahead and make those selections. That's the quick and dirty explanation about how these induced surcharge rules work. Again, this is a very specific situation where a flood is coming, and it uses the induced surcharge rule with a max limit rule together to create a specific value based on the water surface elevation.